Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the Fostex TH-1100RP open-back, full-size, planar magnetic headphone. This is a $2,700 piece. It was loaned to me from Audio 46. Audio 46 has made no attempt to influence my opinion on this piece. They only asked for a fair and honest evaluation and an affiliate link, which I will put down in the description below. So, if you like what I have to say about this headphone and you want to buy it, please consider using that affiliate link down in the description from Audio 46. I will get a small kickback, and I only use affiliate link money to keep the channel running. This headphone was a very interesting experience. It is one of the most Jekyll and Hyde listening experiences that I have had with any audio product since this channel has started, and arguably even before then. So after shameless self-promotion, we're going to talk about when is it Jekyll, when is it Hyde, and how does that affect its value proposition at $2,700 US. All right, let's get into it.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style, and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
To further set this up a little bit, this is the first headphone that has come along that has really directly challenged my claim that I made early in this year. And what I mean is earlier in 2024, that there are now enough headphones that are really high quality at $2,000 US, or right about there, that have kind of reset the high-end headphone market. And I made the claim back then, and I believe it was in June of 2024 when that video came out. That video involved the HiFiMan HE1000se, the HEDD HEDDPhone 2, and the Modhouse Tungsten double-sided, which I do not have with me, but I have since amended that list to also include the Dan Clark E3 right there, because those four headphones together at $2,000 US, as they said, they have really reset the high-end headphone market. And so if you're going to price a brand new headphone at, say, $2,700 US, in my opinion, it better darn well do something clearly better than those four units that I just named, or else it's just too expensive. Okay, and the price needs to come down. So we're also going to keep that backdrop in mind as we talk about the Fostex TH-1100RP here. Okay, so what is the Fostex TH-1100RP? It is the flagship model from Fostex that uses their RP series of planar magnetic drivers. So this is a planar magnetic driver headphone, but the RP drivers have done planar magnetic tech a little bit differently than, you know, the HiFiMans, the Odysseys, the Dan Clarks of the world, that kind of thing. It's just a little bit different approach to doing it. Now, this again is the flagship, or they call it the premium version of the RP driver. So the drivers in here have the physical dimensions. They measure 45.6 by 41.6 millimeters, whereas the RP driver in their much less expensive T50RP Mark IV measures 40 by 34 millimeters. So there is more driver radiating area in the RP driver here in the 1100 and also the closed back sibling of this, the 1000 RP, than there is the cheaper T50 models that are out there anymore. But that is also significantly less driver area than you would get from something like a HiFiMan, an Odyssey, or a Dan Clark, etc. So it's kind of in the middle there. Now, that said, the planar magnetic drivers in here are rated at 32 ohms of impedance with a 96 decibel per milliwatt sensitivity. That makes them pretty easy to drive. That stands in contrast with some of the RP drivers that have existed before. Like I owned a T50RP Mark III mod for a while in the Duconi Blue. And the T50RP Mark III, I'm not sure about the Mark IV anymore, but the Mark III was notoriously hard to drive. It was very inefficient. It required a pretty high amount of amplifier power to sound correct. This is a much easier driving headphone on there, and like the specs that I just read to you are evidence for that, but then also in the listening tests, it did not stress amplifiers very hard to get it up to driving it properly for what properly means for this headphone. All right, with that, we are going to take a unit tour of this where I switch up, do an overhead view of this headphone and show you the build of it, because these wooden cups in particular here are absolutely gorgeous and they deserve to be shown off a little bit. So we're going to cut to that, then we'll come back on the other side. We'll talk about test gear and the listening and get into where this fits in the market and what its value is and all of that. All right, here we go. Quasi-overhead view to look at the build of the headphone. Let's get in a little bit closer, because the star of the show here is these wood cups right here. All right, and these are dyed with an indigo colored dye known as Izome, okay, which is like a traditional Japanese dyeing color and technique in there, and it's reflecting my light quite a bit, but it is a very unique and interesting look there. I mean, look at that wood grain and that color in there. That just looks fantastic, right? So, I mean, aesthetically, very nice headphone and all of that. It has interesting grill work on the back of the cup there. In there, I mean, it is an open back. It is a nice looking headphone. Okay, in there, we actually have fairly large-ish ear openings in here. If you have very tall ears, you might get some pressure here, either on the bottom of the pad or on the top. But look how nice and soft these pads are, and they are memory foam, and they return to their shape, you know, a little bit on the slow side, which is fine. That just makes them nice, soft, and plush on there as well. Okay, we get this much cup swivel, which is not a lot, but it's also not a little either, kind of right in the middle. We have this part right, so we have wood there. This grill material, I believe, is metal, and we have metal here, all of that leading into the headband, which is kind of a suspension strap, but also kind of not really. Okay, head size adjustment there is an iteration of the Fostex design right there. These used to be just like circular bars here, and now they've gone to these like flatter rods there, like so. Now let's talk about the cabling, because the cabling, I mean, it's Fostex, right? They've got these kind of odd 2-pin jacks on them there that they have this plastic housing that is attached to this metal here some way, somehow. I'm not exactly sure how they do that and all of that. And it looks on the surface like it's a Sennheiser HD600 series style of connector, and it physically has that shape, but it's wired backwards. So it's it's, you know, different than a Sen. Here is the stock cable that they send. With it, it is a 7N oxygen-free copper with like 99.9999999% purity, they say, and all of that. Now, it comes with a 1/4-inch single-ended, okay, or 6.35 millimeter single-ended plug on the amp end, and then, yeah, you've got these proprietary 2-pin connectors here on the headphone end, okay, like so, and this cable is about 2 meters long, I think. It looks like it tangles up badly, but actually it just kind of loops back around on itself. If you pull it on either end, it just very clearly and easily comes undone like that. It lays fairly flat. It's got just a little bit of springiness to it, but not bad, with this kind of vinyl-y, rubbery kind of coating on the outside of it here. It's not the worst stock cable I have used. Okay, it's actually far from that. It's fairly decent. The only thing that annoyed me about it is that it's like they force you to use single-ended, and because of the proprietary connections on there, like I do not have Fostex, aftermarket Fostex cables lying around, like I do for 3.5 millimeter or the mini 3-pin XLR or like 2.5 millimeter, you know, all that. I just don't have any of those. My personal Fostex headphone that I own that is a TH-900 Mark II that I've put Lawton Purple Heart chambers on, and when I was restoring that one to its health, because I got it really cheap, put new drivers and all of that on it, and like as I was putting new drivers and new cups on it and everything like that, I replaced the connections with 2.5 millimeter because they are far more common and easier to buy cables for. So I just don't have them, so I was forced to use this. So that's like a complaint, is that if you have a balanced amplifier, and if you're spending $2,700 US for a headphone, there's a very good chance that you do. Okay, you're going to need to budget for an aftermarket cable to be able to use the full capability of that nice headphone amplifier that you have. So the cable on its own is not so bad, okay, to use and all of that. What does get to me a little bit is that because of the proprietary nature and then only having a single-ended connection on it, it's one of those things that, like, it's not the best fit in the market to do it that way at this price. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind if you buy this headphone, is there's a very real chance you're going to want to budget extra money for an aftermarket cable. Okay. Overall, though, like the weight of the headphone, not too bad. It's not the lightest thing I've ever used, but it's not super heavy either. It's actually reasonably comfortable on the head. It does take a moment to find it sealed just because of the slow return to shape of these pads. When you first put it on, it doesn't seal up right away, but it will, if you give it, 2 seconds or so, it will seal up as you start to use it. So that's just something to keep in mind. But other than that, that is the build and the comfort of the headphone. Like, I didn't have any issues with the physical comfort with it, honestly. I did not. I had some other issues with it. Physical comfort was not one of them. All right, so let's go back to me on camera talking about sound and test gear and all of that good stuff. All right, because of the single-ended only cable that I had, test gear had to get switched up a little bit from some of my normals this time around, although there are some commonalities as well to establish a good baseline and all of that. Okay, I am a mostly digital music listener, so all music files would have been lossless or high-res FLAC files or DSD files played locally or streamed from Qobuz through Roon. Roon endpoints for this one would have included a cord 2Go matched to a 2U DDC, a Sonor Ultra Rendu routed through a Singer SU6, or a Sonor Ultra Rendu direct USB output into other DACs. Okay, DACs would have included Schiit Bifrost 2/64, Geshelli Labs J2S with a 4499 chip in it, Burson V7 Vivid op amps in it, and connected to a Swagman 12-volt LPS in there. So it's a very tricked out Geshelli J2S. Okay, other DACs would have included high-end units such as the Lampezator Baltic 3, the Berkeley Audio Alpha Series 2. Let's see what else is in there. The Live Harmony. And were there any others? Probably, but I think you get the picture at this point. Headphone amps would have included the Quicksilver headphone amp, which is a vacuum tube amp, about $1,300. It is transformer coupled, so I used that a little bit. Urzatich Perfitus, Cord Hugo 2, which is a DAC amp, and then also the LTA Z10E, which is my high-end tube amp, and that is single-ended, has a high-quality single-ended output on it there. Okay, so sound then. I mentioned Jekyll and Hyde, and the takeaway here is that the combination of the tuning, the dynamics, the pacing, the rhythm, the timing, okay, all of that here, the resolution, the detail retrieval, the combination of all of these things make it excellent for acoustically oriented music, particularly jazz and some subgenres of classical or orchestral music. Okay, excellent for instrumental jazz, excellent for smaller scale and more relaxed classical music, okay for big classical works like symphonies and big, loud, bombastic, like orchestral movie soundtrack kinds of things. And then outside of that, it's just get it off my head, okay? So what I mean by that is if you're into rock, metal, any of the subgenres of those two, even though metal is a subgenre of rock, okay? So rock and all of its subgenres, pop, hip hop, EDM, okay? Anything like that, for these ears and for my preferences, this is a hard pass, okay? No go there. So that's what I mean by the Jekyll and Hyde nature. The Jekyll, the good side of it, is like for instrumental jazz and that sort of thing. This can be utterly wonderful. For some classical music, like string quartets and that sort of thing, this can be equally wonderful there. It's okay for instrumental, classical, and orchestral music generally, but then you get outside of that, you get anything that's electronic or high energy or anything like that outside of that, and just forget it, okay? That's my take. You are free to disagree with me. All right, why is all of that? Okay, the tuning on this is very Japanese. Now, you've probably heard me say that multiple times on this channel recently, talk about a Japanese tuning. And that's when I was talking with some of the folks at Audio-Technica, back when I had a wave of Audio-Technica gear in for review, that there is like a Japanese tuning that tends to be very mid and treble focused and not as present in the bass, right? And that is very much this headphone. It is very mid-range and treble focused. There is not a whole lot going on in the deep sub-bass. Okay, the bass that is there is pretty good, well textured, detailed, has some decent physicality to it, but it's just very rolled off. The extension isn't great and the sub-bass presence isn't very great either. So the result is not really even a neutral headphone, it's just kind of a brighter headphone overall from like a 1,000-foot view of the frequency response. It just comes across as very bright. It's also quite lean and not necessarily dry. Okay, so like the pace, rhythm, timing stuff in there, it falls kind of in the middle of the wet-dry spectrum. So it's not dry like an E-stat is, but just the way that it is tuned, it is lean sounding. A little bit thin and a little bit lean. All right, those are not the only problems though, because the mid-range has a glare to it on basically on everything. The glare helps to my ears with that instrumental jazz kind of music. But if you try to listen to rock or metal in particular on these, or EDM, that glare, there's a glare in the upper mids, lower treble that becomes fatiguing quickly and then grating right after that, right? Or I just want to get it off my head. And it doesn't really seem to matter how loudly it is played. It just does it. It is a feature of the sound of this headphone that it has a very forward and exacting sound through the upper mids, lower treble that puts a glare and an edge on everything. Okay, so it's almost like edge enhancement on the video side of things. If you're familiar with like video processing and video editing and all that, and you know what edge enhancement is, picture that in terms of sound, and that's what you get here. Okay, so then there is also some sibilance, particularly with those rock and subgenres, hip hop, pop, EDM, that kind of thing. There is a treble peak up there that can also be very sharp and fatiguing. It is not as fatiguing as quickly as that mid-range glare is, but it is still there. Okay, so those to me are some fairly severe tuning issues if you want to use this for general all-purpose listening. If you're looking for a daily driver thing that's going to sound great with all music genres, this is not it to my preferences and to my ears. Okay, let's talk about the things that it does get right though, because there are a few. The dynamics are pretty good, right? It's got a nice, active, lively sound to it. Good snap on snare drums, you know, lots of speed and all that on cymbal crashes, even in jazz when there's a lot of like rapid fire cymbal crashes and all that. Even though they can be a bit sharp at times, it does a good job separating the attacks from the decays and all of that without sounding like E-stat levels of dry. Strikes a nice balance there. Bass is also fairly dynamic and lively. So like you also get a good sense of texture and resolution and all of that in the low end. Now it's got some punch to the bass, but not really a whole lot of slam. In a review that I just did of the HiFiMan Mini Shangri-La system, I talked about how that headphone system also had good punch, but not a lot of slam. And what happens there is there's good physicality in the low end, but more like in the mid bass. But there's not a whole lot of weight and fullness and presence in the sub bass that comes with that punch to give it slam, right? So it just sounds a little bit leaner and all that. So there's a pop to it, a punch to it, but not really a slam or a weightiness to that that comes in there either. Resolution and detail retrieval are pretty good on it as well. So it does a good job with room noises and all that, because like, I mean, I listened to a lot of jazz on this headphone because that's what it was good at. Okay, and I heard a lot of room reverbs come through very clearly and that sort of thing. Spatial presentation is okay. It does a reasonably good job of being three-dimensional and holographic. It's not particularly expansive in its soundstage. It's also not intimate or claustrophobic in any way. It's just kind of what it needs to be in terms of soundstage size. There's a decent sense of width, depth, and height, or in other words, three-dimensionality to that soundstage. The imaging, the separation, and the layering within that soundstage are okay. They are not standout to me. They do a reasonably good job, but I have also heard better even at this price and a little bit cheaper in there, okay? So it does get some things right, okay, and so forth. And like I do want to emphasize that for my ears and all of that with instrumental jazz music, as soon as a vocalist comes on, forget it, okay? Sibilance, shoutiness, honkiness, hollowness to the vocal timbre, all of that kind of stuff comes out, which just really mars the experience for me. But as long as the jazz music stays instrumental, you know, and I did a lot of listening to like, you know, jazz classics like Miles Davis and Ernest Ranglin and Wes Montgomery and Sonny Rollins, you know, just to name a few. And then even some contemporary jazz stuff like Hiromi and her trio project and that sort of thing. All of those sounded really good on this headphone. Just whatever combination that it pulls out, jazz music was just really engaging on this headphone. And I found myself tapping my foot, bobbing my head, and all of that to the music every time a jazz track was played. And that really was its strength. But again, anytime I listened to rock, metal, or hip-hop, or EDM, or pop, or anything like that, I couldn't do it for very long at all. Just didn't like it, didn't want to do it, okay, with this headphone there. But, like, again, just jazz sounds amazing on this. And there's just some magic quality about it that is superb with instrumental jazz music. I don't know exactly what's doing that. Some of that kind of like edge enhancement stuff that I was talking about, I think is partially responsible for that. So the thing that is its Achilles heel or its Mr. Hyde nature and all of the genres where it does not do very well, could very well be the thing that is working with its, you know, Dr. Jekyll or good nature with instrumental jazz. I don't know. It's just what my ears and my experience is telling me. Okay. Comparisons then with other headphones, right? And I mentioned, like I've got several here. For all three of these that I have here, that's not necessarily true. Let's just go down the line here. HiFiMan HE1000se, currently $1,700 US when it was first launched back in like 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. It was a $3,500 US headphone. Then it hung out around 2,000 for a while. Now it's down to 1,700. One of the best values in hi-fi in the market right now, headphone, speaker, or otherwise. Just a phenomenal value for this headphone. For instrumental jazz, I did enjoy the Fostex markedly more than I did the HEXE here, the HE1000se. That surprised me because the HE1000se is a great generalist headphone. It sounds very good to excellent with just about any music genre. Okay, so the fact that the Fostex, for whatever reason, was much more engaging to me for jazz music was quite surprising. But put on anything else, and I very much prefer the HE1000se to the Fostex here. Now, Regardless of what genre of music is playing, the HE1000se is warmer and fuller in its sound. It has more sub-bass presence and rumble. It's got more slam to it and that sort of thing. It is a bigger sound stager, and it is more holographic and three-dimensional, okay, in its spatial presentation than the Fostex is. They are about equal in terms of their dynamics through the mid-range and the treble, but because of the slam that comes with the HE1000se, it has more bass dynamics to it, more low-end dynamics and physicality to its sound and all of that. So outside of anything but instrumental jazz, I very much preferred the HE1000se and found it to be the overall more capable headphone for more genres of music. Fairly similar story with the HEDD HEDDPhone 2 here. Now, the HEDD HEDDPhone 2 is a little bit more like mid-centric and brighter sound, mid and treble focused than the HE1000se is. It does not quite have the bass heft and low end that the HE1000se does, but it has more than what the Fostex TH-1100RP brings. Okay, this one is also, the head is also smoother through the mid-range and the treble. So even though its mid and treble is more the focus of its sound over its bass, in kind of the same way that the Fostex is, the tonal balance of the HEDD 2 is more even and smooth through the mids and the treble. So it doesn't sound honky or hollow or nasally with vocals. It definitely doesn't sound sharp or sibilant with S's and T's, and it's not as fatiguing with cymbal crashes and all of that. Like, this has some of the best treble reproduction you're gonna find in a headphone really of any price. Like, that's a true standout of the HEDD HEDDPhone 2. Now, the Fostex is more dynamically active and impactful, active, lively, that kind of thing over the headphone 2 through the entire frequency range. So that's an advantage that it has. But again, for any genre of music that wasn't instrumental jazz, I preferred the HEDDPhone 2 over the Fostex, and the gap from the Fostex over the HEDDPhone 2 for instrumental jazz was quite substantial. All right. Same kind of thing when you talk about, and I realize it's closed back, but when you talk about the Dan Clark E3. Again, a genre generalist, much better for basically every genre of music that is not instrumental jazz than the Fostex is here. And again, the E3 has almost as much bass and fullness and low-end weight to it as the HE1000se. It's not quite as resolving as the HE1000se, but it's very close. Okay, it has the more natural and even tuning and timbre through the whole frequency spectrum than the Fostex does, like to a very noticeable degree. Okay, and so forth. Now, again, for rock, metal, hip hop, EDM, etc., give me the E3 over the Fostex anytime. What about that instrumental jazz though? The gap between these two was smaller than I expected, because this was the last comparison that I did here between these two. And when I heard how well the TH-1100RP was doing with instrumental jazz over the Hexi, over the HEDD 2, okay, I was like, okay, we're gonna have a blowout here on this one as well. And no, it was not a blowout. I maybe had a mild preference for the Fostex, okay, on here, with instrumental jazz over the E3, but it was, the gap closed a fair amount between these two than it did over, you know, between these two or between these two. Okay, does that mean that I like the E3 best out of all of those? No, I think I still prefer the HE1000se because of its slightly higher resolution, a little bit better bass response, a little bit more holography, bigger soundstage, that sort of thing, over the E3 generally. But for the specific case of instrumental jazz, okay, the E3 got much closer to the Fostex TH-1100RP than any of these other two. Okay. So there are my comparisons, and those are some of my thoughts here on the TH-1100RP. So very Jekyll and Hyde, but, you know, meaning very Jekyll and also very Hyde. All right, and so it is a specialist among specialists, right? Like, it's like it is especially specialized in its speciality, okay? Which that's probably a good video title. We'll workshop that one. Okay, like it has a very real strength, and so I think it will carve out a niche market as it is in its stock form, right? But it's going to be for a very specific listener set in there and all that. So let's talk about the value proposition, because, you know, coming back to my claim earlier that if you're going to release a headphone above $2,000 US, knowing that the HE1000se and the HEDD Headphone 2 and the Dan Clark E3 and the double-sided Modhouse Tungsten are all out there hanging out pretty close to $2,000 USD and are all amazing, okay? You better do something really well, at least one thing, preferably more, really well to justify being more than $2,000. Does the TH-1100RP do that? For instrumental jazz to these ears, it clearly provides a more engaging and enjoyable experience than the HE1000se or the HEDD 2. I don't have the Modhouse Tungsten double-sided on hand to check, so I can't answer on that one. Okay, but over those other two, yes. For any other genre of music, really, though, give me the HEDD 2 or the HE1000se all day long. The Dan Clark E3 comes much closer to this one on jazz, but also on any other music genre, give me the E3 over the Fostex all day, any day. Okay, so is that going to be worth the $700 beyond these other headphones over here? There's going to be a very narrow niche of people for whom that might be the case. You're just a jazz-aholic. You're looking for a headphone that's super engaging, brings your jazz music to life, and if that's you, I think you should audition this headphone because it's really can be very magical in that very narrow use case. But if you are into rock, metal, hip-hop, EDM, pop music, basically anything else, large-scale orchestral and symphonic kinds of things, okay, all that kind of stuff, then no. To me, for my ears, my preferences, my listening experiences tell me very much no for this headphone here. So I think for the vast majority of audiophiles and potential customers out there, no, the TH-1100RP does not earn its $2,700 price tag, but there's a very small subset of listeners out there who are looking for that jazz specialist for whom it could be. Okay, and so that's where my review and my take will land with the Fostex TH-1100RP. So, leaving it there. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon. Generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. This again has been my review of the Fostex TH-1100RP. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.